Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm a teacher and author, and this is English Nerd. So this video is specifically for the teachers out there. Normally I'm speaking to students, but this time I'm speaking to people who teach Shakespeare. When you talk to people about Shakespeare, very often they'll have a strong opinion about it. Maybe they really didn't get it in high school, maybe they never read it, maybe they enjoyed some plays and not others. I am pretty strongly of the opinion that if you teach Shakespeare well, way more people are going to be invested. They're going to learn not only what the plays are about, but also reading skills, analytical skills, all kinds of really good stuff that is going to follow people beyond English class and into other parts of their lives. And so today I wanted to give you some tips for how to teach Shakespeare plays, not just one in particular, but Shakespeare plays in general. So here are things that have worked for me. Now, just a little bit of background to kind of kick things off. I taught Shakespeare for 14 years. I've studied Shakespeare for much longer than that. I even wrote a Hamlet retelling, Laertes, which is a dark academia Hamlet retelling set in the 1920s. So I am kind of obsessed with at least certain Shakespeare plays. I have my favorites, I have my least favorites. We're allowed to have our opinions, right? So the first thing I would recommend that you do is orient your students. Reading Shakespeare just cold is going to feel like trying to lift a really heavy weight without building up to it first. So the things that you should help your students with, I would recommend are some basic Shakespearean vocabulary. If they don't know that "an" means if, or "thou" means you, and a couple things like that, then it's going to be extra difficult for them to even follow what is going on. Sure, there are some thorny passages for even us teachers, but for the most part, your students should hopefully get to the place where they understand the majority of what's going on, the gist of what's going on, without needing everything explained to them. So getting some Shakespearean vocabulary under their belts, I think, is a nice thing to do, at least while you're reading the play. Something else to orient students to is a little bit of background. I like to do some Shakespearean background before we launch into Hamlet or Macbeth or The Tempest or Twelfth Night or whatever it is that we're going to be reading in class. And so I talk about yes, there are the authorship debates, and this is not the place where I'm going to talk about those, but I talk about the Globe Theater and some of the conventions of the plays and things like that, just so that people can get a sense of the world from which it came, potentially the mind from which this play came. So getting that biographical information is great as well. Next, and you don't need to do all of this before you start the play, but I think toward the beginning, while people are still finding their feet with those first couple scenes, these are some great things to do. Third, I like to talk about plot structure. So when you have something like a Shakespearean tragedy, you have Macbeth, for example, then there's a very clear dramatic structure that Shakespeare follows throughout the story. So you have the exposition, you have the rising action, you have that climactic turn, you have the falling action, and you have the catastrophe. And so being able to at least loosely map that is something that can be helpful for remembering the order of events and where some of those major turning points are. You have the exposition into the rising action, and that hinge there is the complication or the inciting incident. So you know that the inciting incident is going to be very important. You know that that climactic turn from the rising to the falling action is going to be important. And you know that that hinge to the catastrophe is also going to be important. So it helps you identify some of those important scenes along the way as you go. The last thing that I tend to do for students before launching into a play is giving them a little bit of background about the play. Now, I do not tell them what the story is. That is spoily. I am personally of the opinion that everybody who comes to a story fresh kind of brings that story to life once again. This is why we use present tense for literature, because it's Hamlet lives every time somebody opens up that play or they watch that play on screen or on a stage. So instead of giving them the story of the play, the only potential exception to this is Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, just because you kind of need to know the end to get some of the dramatic tension. But anyway, no Shakespeare plays. Instead, what I do is I give a little bit of background, so some of the information that you gain from the expository conversations at the beginning of the play. So for example, when I'm teaching Hamlet, I do talk about how Hamlet Sr., the king, has just died. I talk about how things are going poorly in Denmark, about how Claudius, Prince Hamlet's uncle, has just ascended to the throne by marrying Hamlet's mother, Gertrude. And so just getting a couple of these names and situations in place before we begin the play, and those aren't spoilers, those are just the setup, and making it easier to see what that setup is, I think is useful too. So those are some groundwork items that I find really useful when I'm teaching Shakespeare. And then when I'm actually in the throes of teaching the play itself, I like to do a few things. One, I do not send students home to read the plays on their own unless they're like AP literature senior level, maybe. In college, I would send people home maybe to do some reading. However, the vast majority of the time, basically whenever I can get away with it, or if it's anybody's first encounter with Shakespeare, then I much prefer to read it aloud in parts. Lots of reasons for this. It is so much easier to understand the play when you hear it aloud in parts, as opposed to just seeing it all as one block and not necessarily separating out those characters in your mind. If you're having, Lucy read Gertrude and Marcus read Claudius, then you can hear that there's this difference in personality. You can hear the plot a little more clearly, especially over time as you get more practice. So I do love to do that. If I have a character like Hamlet who loves the sound of his own voice, just Lord love him, then sometimes I will switch up the students, or I'll take part of a scene or something, just so that more people get a chance to speak and it's not only one person who is giving that performance. Because I personally am pretty emotive, as you can hopefully tell, and I'm passionate about some of these plays, I will take on certain characters in very dramatic moments, sometimes just to get across what, the drama of that moment is, and by my inflection, make it easier to understand on their own, hopefully. So I have students read these parts. I also like to intersperse different scenes that I show them. So this can be parts of plays, this can be parts of movies, but not just for the sake of watching them. I think it's worthwhile just to watch them, but I'll ask specific questions. I'll start with general impressions. Did you like it? Did you not like it? But it's the why that's the most important to me. Okay, so you didn't like it. You didn't think it worked. You didn't think it was a good portrayal of the play. Why not? What was missing? Is there something in the text that we read that isn't coming across in this version? Is there a line that was cut that you think was important to the meaning? Did the play talk about how dark it was, yet the movie made it look very light? So you start to get kids thinking about the play like someone who's analyzing it, or somebody who's acting in it, or somebody who is directing a performance, and having to justify their answers, their opinions, and then give textual evidence for why it would be better another way, or why this version is better than this one. It's a sneaky way to make people do analysis while they're feeling like they're just having, an in-class argument, which they are, right? So I like to do that when I can. Like I said, I like to show more than one performance or a piece of a performance so that people can kind of evaluate which one is more successful, and again, why is that. Something else I like to do is to make sure as we're reading along in the play that people are not only understanding what's going on, that's largely what I'll be doing. I pause pretty regularly and make sure that people understand, you know, if they can't paraphrase what happened, I'll paraphrase what the characters are saying. But I also want them to be able to analyze on their own. So one level of that analysis you can see with performances like I just described. Another level of analysis is by having them annotate a small section of the play. So there are a variety of ways that you can do this. One favorite of mine is when you have a big soliloquy in a tragedy, for example. I do this with Hamlet's second soliloquy. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. Is it not monstrous that this player here, blah, 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 blah. I print out, yes, I'm old school like that. I don't do everything digitally, but I print out that speech and I kind of chop it into about 6 sections that make sense together, right? There's a thought, or, you know, a couple thoughts, and then another thought, and there are shifts throughout the speech. So what I have students do is I have them read through that speech, or maybe we've read it all together at this point, but they reread through it, and then they paraphrase what each of those sections means. What is Hamlet talking about when he says, the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king? In their own words, what is the gist of that part of the speech? You can go more, you can go deeper into this sort of annotation analysis. With my AP classes, I would do much more in-depth sort of annotation and analysis. I would ask them about word choice and figurative language and things like that. But for my sophomores reading Hamlet, I want to make sure that they understand the gist. Maybe they circle words that they don't know the definitions to so they can ask me. So that will help them with their close paraphrase of that speech. Another way that you can do this is treat it like the play that it is, right? You choose a short section, maybe not a soliloquy, but something with individual lines going on, and then have them write in some stage directions, even if those stage directions are just an adverb to describe how to deliver that line, sadly, or whatever, just to show that they get the emotions of the characters, the motivations, they have an idea of where you might put these people in space as they're interacting with one another. So yeah, I love to do all those things. And then once students start to get a feel for the language a little bit more, I pick and choose different scenes to have students basically perform in front of the class. So for example, the final scene in Hamlet where you have all hands on deck, tons of characters, lots of action going on, then I'll have some kind of makeshift props ready to go. I give them to the different people, and then I have them act out that final scene. It's funny, it's fun, it's memorable, and it leaves people with a positive sense of Shakespeare as well. I think Shakespeare, when Shakespeare's at his best, he's unbeatable. It's like eating chocolate ganache. And so giving students the sense of just how not only profound some of his ideas are and eloquent his words are, but how fun the plays are as well. How these appeal not only to philosophers, but also to the groundlings who would just, drink in the standing room only section against the stage and be all excited when the ghost came on. I think it's important that students can kind of see both of those sides, that there's some fun, there's some, hijinks and what have you, but there's also that's those serious thoughts on humanity as well. Couple final thoughts on teaching Shakespeare. Speaking of that language and really diving in, I would have my students memorize part of, a speech or a scene, not put on the whole play or anything. That's an enormous amount of memorization, but somebody would do to be or not to be. That is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind, and they can interpret it how they wanted. I would grade on memorization, so literally, do they know the words word for word, because there's a rhythm to them that you can't just paraphrase in this memorization performance, but do you have it memorized? And then, worth a tiny bit less but just about the same amount, I would grade them on performance as well. For the students who weren't very actory, which is fine, the performance would be things like, do your movements enhance or at least not distract from your performance? So, are you fidgeting? Are you shifting your weight? Or are you being more deliberate with your movements? Eye contact kind of stuff. Are you just looking up or looking down for the whole speech? That's obviously, again, distracting. So is it just good basic speech etiquette? And does the way that they present the words, does that get across the meaning of the words, or is it quiet and monotonous? Quiet and monotonous wouldn't get a great score. They could still do well on the recitation, but there's a difference between to be or not to be. That is the question, which is nobler, and there's if I'm in the audience, I don't care. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's being said. But if somebody comes up and says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die. I mean, that is compelling stuff. All of a sudden, maybe you don't understand everything that's being said, but you have a much better sense of what's being said. So I would grade them on that kind of performance through the way that they say their words and their inflection. Can you tell that they know what they're talking about? And then I would leave some space at the end of the recitations for students in the class to ask basic questions like, well, what does this word mean that you used? Or what does this line mean? I didn't catch it. Or, just basic stuff, again, to make sure that the students understand what they were performing. Yeah, that's the majority of the advice that I was planning to talk about. I actually have a couple of resources. I have an entire packet on teaching Shakespeare that gets into more detail, including an outline of Shakespeare biography, including a whole list of commonly used Shakespeare words on my website, carly-stevens.com. I'll put the links down below. So if you're interested in teaching Shakespeare and doing a job that is fun for you, fun for the students, and allows them to learn a ton, then I would definitely recommend checking that out. Otherwise, make sure that you like this video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next week.